Semion Yudkovich Mogilevich, Russia's scariest mob boss. European and US agencies have described Semion Mogilevich as the boss of all bosses, and he is considered one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the world. The leader of a Russian organized crime mob, he is in charge of at least 250 men and has ties to many Russian and Ukrainian political figures. However, although his influence and power are vast, most people have never heard of him, and much of Mogilevich's early life remains a mystery. Nonetheless, today we aim to shed a bit of light on the career criminal and his life as we examine the case of Semion Yudkovich Mogilevich, Russia's scariest mob boss. Early crimes. As we briefly mentioned during the introduction, there is little information available on Mogilevich's early life and upbringing. After graduating from school, he attended the Ivan Franko National University of Lviv, where he acquired a degree in economics. Mogilevich first started making money from crime in the 1970s when he started to provide currency conversion, then controlled by the government, to criminal gangs. In 1974, he was convicted in Russia for violating the rules of such currency transactions, and 3 years later he was convicted again, this time for fraud. Though his stints in prison were short, 3 years followed by 4 years, it is said that his time behind bars helped him to create various connections, which served only to boost his criminal empire when he was released. He also ran a funeral planning business around this time, which was, by all accounts, legitimate. In the 1980s, however, Mogilevich's criminal career really began to take off when he started scamming Ukrainian and Russian Jews who were eager to move abroad, many of whom left for Israel. As their plans took shape, these individuals would use Mogilevich as an intermediary, selling their expensive belongings including jewelry and artwork. He would make deals to purchase their assets and sell them for a fair price before sending the proceeds to them overseas. But rather than return the money at the end of it, he instead pocketed the proceeds. This allowed him to earn so much money that he quickly acquired millionaire status. In the coming years, he would fund jewelry stores and manufacturing businesses in both Eastern and Western Europe. The jewelry stores in particular were used as a front for a theft business in which jewelry, antiques, and art would all be stolen from churches, museums, the homes of art collectors, and synagogues and sold on. Mogilevich was also known in the 1980s to be associated with the USSR's Lubertsy gang. What started as a youth group originating from a suburb in Moscow became criminal in later years. The group was initially for those who enjoyed athletics, including bodybuilding, gymnastics, and boxing, though it had strong principles and aims. They sought to cleanse Soviet society of Western trends, influence, and subcultures, taking a particular dislike to hippies and punks, among other groups. Their standards included no cheating in fights, no attacks on women, and no attacks on couples. They were also anti-fascist and anti-Nazi. But as the years went by, some members of the group became involved with organized crime syndicates. And as those syndicates grew and became more frequent in the 1990s, they began to search for low-level thugs capable of violence, turning their attention to athletic types who were often members of the Lubertsy gang, as well as to the ex-police and military men. As well as his association with the Lubertsy gang, Mogilevich was said to be friends with Sergei Mikhailov, the founder of the Solntsevskaya gang, an organized crime group also known as the Solntsevskaya Bratva, which started in the late 1980s. Mikhailov was once a waiter who had gone to prison after being found guilty of fraud, and his gang was infamous for recruiting often young, unemployed, and aggressive young men to carry out its crimes. They set themselves up in a strategic position near the M3 highway leading to Ukraine, as well as several other important spots, which allowed them to become part of the car import business. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the group began forging relationships with political figures so that they could influence Russian politics for their own benefit, and during the 1980s, Mogilevich was used to launder money. However, it seems that at one point Mogilevich and Mikhailov had some sort of disagreement. According to former FBI agent Bob Levinson, in 1995, Mogilevich narrowly avoided meeting his end when he was tipped off about his own murder. Levinson told the BBC that during a cabaret performance at a hotel in Prague, ropes from the ceiling came down and members of the Czech Republic's organized crime SWAT team came into the restaurant, jumped on the stage, and with machine guns basically ordered the crowd not to move. The party had been attended by Uzbek drug trafficker Gafur Rakimov too, and it is believed that he and Mikhailov were planning to kill Mogilevich during the evening following a dispute over $5 million. According to Mogilevich, he arrived late to the event, saw that the police were present, and hastily left, hiding in a nearby hotel until dawn. However, it has been speculated that a higher-up within the police tipped him off. Around this time, Mikhailov and his gang were moving into the banking sector, which allowed them to launder their own money, and thus, their need for Mogilevich was no longer there. Shortly afterwards, the Czech Interior Ministry banned the career criminal from their country for 10 years. The Hungarian government declared him persona non grata, and the British barred him from entering the UK, labeling him as one of the most dangerous men in the world. In May 1990, Mogilevich registered Aragon Limited in Alderney, the Channel Islands, a known tax haven. The company was, on the face of it, one which traded in consumer goods, and even held a contract with the Ukrainian railway company to sell oil. However, Aragon was the most notable for being the main company through which Mogilevich could carry out his money laundering schemes. He utilized bank accounts in Geneva, New York, Stockholm, and London, and laundered money through all sorts of other banks, including Alliance Credit Bank, based in Ukraine, and Independent Trade Union Bank, which operates in Cyprus, Russia, and Israel. The following year, Aragon Limited formed Arbat International Inc. in Moscow and set up offices within the city. Arbat was used as Mogilevich's main company for exporting petrol, and he had a stake in various other oil companies. In 1991, Mogilevich moved to Hungary and married his girlfriend, Caitlin Papp, to whom he appears to still be married today. Prior to this, Mogilevich married twice, first to Tatiana Markova, then to Galina Grigorieva. And altogether, he has 10 children from his marriages, including 9 sons, all of whom work for their father's criminal enterprise. The whereabouts of his only daughter are reportedly unknown. It has been alleged that Mogilevich has taken great pains to hide her from anyone who may wish to do him harm. Following his marriage to Caitlin Papp, Mogilevich gained a Hungarian passport. The couple lived together in a fortified villa just outside Budapest, and as well as continuing to engage in criminal activities, he also purchased and invested in several local businesses, including an armament factory which built anti-aircraft weaponry. The CIA later alleged that he supplied Iran with several missiles and 12 armored personnel carriers for $20 million. He was also known to continue dabbling in jewelry and antique fraud, including running a scheme in Budapest where he would receive Fabergé eggs to be restored, but would instead pass the genuine articles to be sold at auction, while fake copies of the eggs were returned to Moscow after the restoration process was completed. Around this time, Mogilevich also established a series of nightclubs named the Black and White Nightclubs. During this period, exploitative sex work was rampant in Eastern Europe, in part thanks to Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev, who introduced the notion of perestroika, referring to the restructuring of the economy of the country in order to end the era of stagnation. On the back of perestroika, sex work was no longer hidden away and seen as an illicit activity. Instead, the state tried to legalize and tax the work so that they could make money from it too. Hungary was quick to adopt this kind of tactic, and much of Eastern Europe followed suit. The poor economic situation in these countries led to many women to turn to sex work in an effort to escape poverty and create a better life for themselves. But instead, many of them fell prey to gangs and pimps who wished to exploit them. Furthermore, Budapest soon became known as the heart of Eastern Europe's pornography industry. The establishments that Mogilevich set up thrived in Prague and Budapest and became the main hub for his prostitution operations, acting as fronts for brothels. In the mid-1990s, Mogilevich gained control of Income Bank, one of the biggest private banks in Russia. The deal had been carried out in secret with Vladimir Vinogradov, the president of the company, who in 1996 was named as the 12th richest man in Russia. However, Income Bank went under in 1998 following the Russian financial crisis. According to a UPI report from October 1998, Russia's central bank revoked Income Bank's license following the crisis, leading the company to collapse completely. In 1997 and 1998, Mogilevich drew the attention of the FBI for a scheme that involved the theft of $150 million from investors. A report from the FBI archives dated October 21, 2009, noted that the career criminal had made it to their 10 most wanted fugitives list, in part because of the scam, but also due to his other activities, including racketeering, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and more. According to the account, Mogilevich defrauded investors in the stock of YBM Magnex International, a Canadian company based outside of Philadelphia, which he had total control over. Special Agent Peter Cowenhoven observed, "The FBI doesn't have the jurisdiction to charge him with other crimes taking place solely in other countries, but open source reporting shows him to be involved in weapons trafficking, contract murders, extortion, drug trafficking, and prostitution on an international scale." Cowenhoven added, "What makes him so dangerous is that he operates without borders. Here's a guy who managed to defraud investors out of $150 million without ever stepping foot in the Philadelphia area." Former FBI agent Bob Levinson echoed similar sentiments, stating, "He's a sophisticated racketeer who uses the cover of an international businessman to basically convince people you've got nothing to hide by dealing with me. This is all a mistake, and just take a look at my bank accounts and the people that I run with, and you'll see that this is all an error on the part of the authorities." Notably, the CEO of the company, Jacob Bogatin, is no amateur when it comes to prominent crime figures. When asked if he was aware of Mogilevich's reputation, he replied, "We have an investors relations guy. You want to talk to him about this stuff." He later claimed that although he read the allegations against his boss, he didn't believe him. Bogatin's brother David was at one point an established criminal figure too. As a young man, he spent time serving in the Soviet Union's military during Vietnam, and later in life wound up committing a multi-million-dollar gasoline tax fraud scheme. Though he was arrested, he jumped bail and escaped to Poland, where he continued to move around money with newly accrued bank accounts, and also secured several Trump Tower apartments through an associate. Before long, he was caught by authorities and returned to the US, where he was convicted and given 8 years in prison. The BBC asked Mogilevich about the YBM Magnex International scheme in 2007. He replied, "Well, if they found old-fashioned hanky-panky, it's up to them to prove it. Unfortunately, I don't have access to FBI files." It wasn't just Mogilevich that was involved, however. Reportedly, many other criminal bosses were, including members of the Russian Mafia. The scheme was exposed by Canadian journalists, and in 2003, Mogilevich and his two accomplices were formally indicted in Pennsylvania on 45 counts. But as they have never come to the US or a country with an extradition treaty, they have still not faced justice for their actions. In August 1999, several newspapers, including the New York Times, reported that an FBI source had revealed to them that Mogilevich was involved in laundering $10 billion through the Bank of New York for the Russian Mafia. The accounts with the bank had been opened for a business named BenX Worldwide Limited, owned by Mogilevich. In the articles written at the time also observed that the Ukrainian national was responsible for the attempted murder of a journalist who had been reporting on his crimes for years. 1 year later, in 1998, Robert Friedman wrote an article for the Village Voice, describing Mogilevich's crimes and dangerous reputation after receiving numerous files from the FBI as well as Israeli intelligence. 1 month after the publication of the article, the FBI alerted Friedman that an organized crime figure had ordered a hit on him. Though the details at the time were scant, the New York Times reported that it was Mogilevich who had taken out the contract for $100,000, and the CIA had caught the threat in a telephone conversation. Though Friedman went briefly into hiding, he soon returned to New York. Mogilevich's threat was not the first he'd received in his line of work. Friedman was a dedicated journalist who regularly covered organized crime, including discussing how the Russian mob had infiltrated the National Hockey League via extortion and harassment. After this particular piece had been published, he received a Valentine's card from Russian mob kingpin Vyacheslav Ivankov. The Red Mafia. Robert Friedman's piece for the Village Voice, The Most Dangerous Mobster in the World, certainly paints a portrait of a cruel, calculated, and violent man, describing how Mogilevich's Red Mafia, named so by international police agencies, involves young thugs trained by Soviet Afghanistan war veterans. These thugs are often sent to deal with inconveniences, most notably wealthy businessmen who refuse to entertain Mogilevich or his extortion attempts. In retaliation for the lack of cooperation, these men are stabbed several times, tortured, and mutilated. The resulting state of their corpses is said to be so horrific that even competing criminal organizations find it not just disturbing, but downright terrifying. The Red Mafia rose to the top in only 6 years, and although it's based in Budapest, it also has hubs in the likes of New York, California, and New Zealand. By this time, Mogilevich was known as Brainy Don, a name given to him for his intelligent thinking and cunning, ruthless planning, as well as the fact that he is a highly educated man. Up until the publishing of this 1998 article, little was publicly known about Mogilevich or his activities. According to the documents accessed by Friedman, one of his closest associates and partners is a man named Manya Elson, who referred to Mogilevich as the most powerful mobster in the world, and noted, "He's my best friend." The pair were so close that after Elson was shot outside his home in Brooklyn, NYC, Mogilevich arranged to have him flown out of the country and set him up in Italy to help with yet another of his many money laundering schemes. Elson was later arrested, however, and extradited to the US. The documents made it clear that indeed Mogilevich is a very powerful man. In the late 1990s, he was known to authorities for trafficking nuclear materials, drugs, sex workers, antiques, stolen artwork, and even precious gems. Almost every criminal activity one could think of, Mogilevich was already a part of. As well as that, he had hitmen in both the US and Europe, tight control of Moscow's Sheremetyevo International Airport so that he could smuggle drugs and other supplies as he pleased, and even purchased a bankrupt airline so that he could transport heroin. The FBI also noted that he practically owned the entire Hungarian armaments industry, which alone was a threat to not just the country's security, but to the likes of NATO as well. The documents also noted that much of Mogilevich and the Red Mafia's success was owed to corruption, be it police or politicians. In 1994, one of the organization's top lieutenants was even seen mingling with US politicians at a Republican Party fundraiser in Dallas. This same lieutenant was also a high-ranking member of the Ukrainian Railway Administration, and had been convicted at least once on charges of bribery back in Ukraine. The FBI wrote, "The corruptive influence of the Mogilevich organization apparently extends to the Russian security team. During 1995, 2 colonels from Department of the Russian Presidential Security Service traveled to Hungary under commercial cover to meet with Mogilevich, seeking information for use in the Russian political campaign. The documents observed that an Israeli associate of Mogilevich met with 2 men and provided them with intelligence. The FBI were also aware that Mogilevich paid off a Russian judge in order to secure the release of his business partner, Vyacheslav Ivankov, the same mob kingpin who threatened journalist Robert Friedman in 1998. At the time, Ivankov was imprisoned in Siberia after being convicted on counts of robbery and torture. As well as having his lieutenants attend events in the US, Mogilevich was also known to be laundering money in the country. Dozens of shell companies he set up reportedly received over $30 million from Aragon Limited, the cornerstone of his money laundering business. Though he was banned from obtaining a US visa because he's on the FBI watch list, Mogilevich did enter the country on several occasions using various aliases and visitor visas he obtained in Tel Aviv. When in the US, he mostly visited Ivankov and Manya Elson. But the corruption, the strategic connections, and the crimes don't stop there. In April of 1998, Germany's intelligence agency, the BND, was found to have entered into a secret contract with Mogilevich in which they requested information on the Russian mob. This pact was revealed by German TV network ZDF, who'd received the information from several sources, including a Belgian police investigator who spent years looking into the activities of organized crime groups in Russia. Many European authorities were disgruntled by the news that Mogilevich and his Red Mafia were acting as a source for the BND, as it made it more difficult, if not impossible, to investigate the criminal gang. Reportedly, Germany's BND had been attempting to investigate the Russian mob itself, but was effectively being stonewalled by the country's government, which didn't want to cooperate. As a result, they turned to Mogilevich. Mogilevich has also been in hot water with authorities in the UK. In 1994, British police officers were alerted to his criminal activities by their Eastern European counterparts. UK investigators soon began looking into the allegations that Mogilevich and his group were laundering profits from arms dealing, drug trafficking, and other criminal activities through a firm of London lawyers. DS John Wanless told the Sunday Times, Semion Mogilevich is one of the world's top criminals, who has a personal wealth of $100 million. As a result of the effect of his financial impact on the City of London, he clearly falls in the category of a core criminal. In 1999, investigators attempted to speak with Mogilevich in relation to the Bank of New York money laundering scheme, although it appears that they were unable to do so. An arrest. In January 2008, media outlets began to report that Mogilevich, who was 61 at the time, had been arrested by Russian authorities. He was seized by around 50 police officers while outside of a supermarket in Moscow, and his bodyguards were also apprehended. News stories described him as being pockmarked while wearing jeans, a leather jacket, and a cap. During this period, he was still facing charges in the US in connection with fraud, money laundering, and racketeering, and he was arrested while using a different name, Sergei Schneider. A spokeswoman told the press, Mogilevich is a person with multiple surnames, multiple citizenships, and has been pursued for 15 years not only by Russia's law enforcement agencies, but also the law enforcement agencies of other countries. An associate of Mogilevich's, a man named Vladimir Nekrasov, was also arrested. Nekrasov is described as an art collector and cosmetics magnate who owns a series of Russian beauty stores named Arbat Prestige. A Moscow court reportedly approved the arrest after both men were accused of tax evasion. The Federal Tax Service sought to acquire $5.5 million in taxes and fines from the pair. In March 2008, it was reported that Nekrasov could face up to 7 years in prison if he was found guilty of tax evasion. In July 2009, Mogilevich was finally released from police custody along with his associate because the terms under which they could be held had expired. A spokesperson for the Interior Ministry's investigative committee stated that the charges against them are not of a particularly grave nature, so investigators had no particular reason to keep them imprisoned. They maintained, however, that the case had not been dropped. Mogilevich's lawyers maintained his innocence and denied any involvement with the tax evasion scheme. However, in 2011, the case against both men was dropped due to absence of crime. Russia also stated that it would not hand Mogilevich over to the US authorities since its constitution does not allow the extradition of its citizens. The Moscow Times reported that the investigation had begun to disintegrate in October of 2010 when Moscow's Tuchinski District Court cited procedural violations as a reason that prosecutors could not proceed, while the Moscow Arbitration Court canceled the claims against the two men. Both Mogilevich and Nekrasov alleged that the tax evasion story had been made up by rivals looking to take over their business. However, they declined to share further details. Mogilevich and the natural gas pipelines. One of the main concerns of the various investigative bodies who have named Mogilevich a dangerous criminal is the fact that he controls extensive natural gas pipelines in Eastern Europe, according to the FBI. Prior to its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia provided between 30 and 40% of Europe's gas, selling the EU hundreds of millions of cubic meters of it per day. According to John Wood, a senior anti-money laundering consultant with the International Political Science Association, noted in his report about Mogilevich that the crime boss's activities were never accidental, that he'd planned to have a stake in Europe's gas as early as the 1990s. In 1991, Mogilevich's Arbat International Company began dabbling in the energy sector. It continued to work as a petrol import and export business, while in 2002, his lawyer, Zeev Gordon, created Ural Transgas, or ETG, which became the main go-between for the Ukraine and Turkmenistan. However, ETG was replaced by Ros-Ukrenergo, or RUE, a company partially owned by Ukrainian oligarch Dmytro Firtash. Prior to 2009, the Swiss-registered company was the sole importer of natural gas from Gazprom, a giant Russian energy business. They would then resell the gas to the largest oil and gas company in Ukraine. For years, it was speculated that Mogilevich was involved with RUE, though the exact ties he had to the company were unclear. Nevertheless, in 2010, Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko stated that she had documented proof that some powerful criminal structures are behind the Ros-Ukrenergo company. Tymoshenko had been looking to get rid of the intermediary companies between the two for some time, and had even reached an agreement with Russian PM Vladimir Putin to do so, though he had failed to follow through on his side of things. Firtash, for his part, has claimed that Mogilevich has nothing to do with the business, but stated that he asked the crime boss for permission to operate businesses in Ukraine as early as 1986. He also alleged that it was impossible to do business in the country without striking deals with organized criminals. The documents on WikiLeaks, the website which released the story about the Ukrainian PM's proof, stated, Firtash acknowledged that he needed and received permission from Mogilevich when he established various businesses, but he denied any close relationship to him. However, it was also alleged in the leaks that the two men were tied through joint holdings in offshore vehicles and mutual personal relationships. They also reportedly shared the same lawyer. According to the WikiLeaks article, Firtash made much of his wealth from the gas trade, and his net worth was in the tens of billions of dollars. The aftermath. Mogilevich's Red Mafia is by all accounts considered one of the most formidable Russian organized crime families in the world. The structured organization is known to have at least 250 members, and Mogilevich is in charge of a multi-billion-dollar criminal empire by spearheading the group, which is said to be responsible for not just fraud, money laundering, drug trafficking, and prostitution, but also human trafficking, arms trafficking, murder, aiding and abetting, smuggling, and securities fraud. Over the course of his career in crime, Mogilevich has made connections with Vladimir Putin, Yuri Loskov, the former mayor of Moscow, and Leonid Derkach, the former head of the Security Service of Ukraine. Notably, a 3,000-page file on Mogilevich, which had reportedly been in the works since 1993, was destroyed by the SSU in 2005 following a change of leadership within the agency, despite the fact that the new chairman ordered that no documents be destroyed. Mogilevich has continuously grown his empire by allying himself with many of the world's most notorious gangs, from the Russian mob to the Italian Camorra, and keeping himself one step ahead of the game with his links to Germany's BND. Journalist Robert Friedman, in his article for The Village Voice, noted that Mogilevich's financial skills, leadership abilities, and vast connections and influence have helped to make him virtually untouchable. FBI agent Peter Cowenhoven added, "Victims don't mean anything to him. With him, it's all about money. Money and influence. And the really chilling thing is that he seems willing to work with any criminals, regardless of their ideology."